And the earth was chaos and without form. And darkness was over the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light. Let there be light." And there was light. My journey in the footsteps of the Cistercians leads me to a lost, silent world. Or does it? Not quite, as this place here proves. For almost 500 years now, the old walls of the former monastery of Pforte near Naumburg have been home to a bustling school. Apart from during the holidays, silence is the exception here, not the rule. What comes to mind when I say the words monastery, monk, or nun? The witty may offer up a smutty joke. Romantics will dream up picturesque ruins and wild gardens, and foodies will probably think of beer, wine, and herbs. The world of the white monks, as the Cistercians were called thanks to the colour of their robes, extends far beyond the walls of their monasteries. To this day, traces of their work can be seen throughout Europe. When the order was founded 900 years ago in Burgundy, France, no one could have predicted how quickly and successfully the Cistercians would spread throughout the continent, transforming it culturally as well as economically. Within a good 300 years, the dedication with which the monks followed the rule of St. Benedict and its motto, ora et labora, pray and work, enabled a network of secluded monastic communities to become one of the largest and most influential economic empires of the Middle Ages.
Here we are in the Steigerwald forest near Ibrach. The forest was once managed by the Cistercians. It then became Royal Bavarian Forest and is today owned by the Bavarian state. When the monks came here, the Steigerwald was already inhabited. It has been in human hands, as it were, since the Neolithic age. However, the Cistercians had the advantage that they were willing and able to settle in areas that the locals had not utilized before, namely the valley meadows. These valleys were inhospitable. There was malaria, there were swamps. The Cistercians' excellent hydraulic engineering skills enabled them to settle in these harsh locations and make use of these valley meadows. The Cistercians were so successful because they were highly efficient, very economical, and always guided by the thought, which landscape is best suited for which purpose?
The monks simply ventured into places where no one else wanted to go. Often these areas were near rivers, swampy areas which they drained. They were masters of water management. They cultivated the landscapes, producing wine, growing crops. They brought new life to the landscape, and they got the locals on board too.
Langheim is situated in a valley basin, much like many other Cistercian monasteries. They actively sought solitude and wanted to live secluded, remote from other settlements. Apart from that, it's also the site of two opposing forces wrestling for dominance. The Prince Bishop of Bamberg, who was the driving force behind the foundation, and the Count of Giechburg, whose encroachment was to be reined in by the foundation. Among other things, a monastery is always a move in the chess game sovereigns play against each other. It's marking territorial boundaries. This is where my realm begins and yours ends here. Thus, it's also an element of affirming power. Here in the Tauber Valley, 4 knights joined forces to found and endow a monastery for their salvation. They wanted to bring Cistercian monks here who were also known as God's gardeners due to their famously efficient way of farming.
Klostergründung, Stiftung gemacht, die lag hier oben.
The first monastery was situated up here on the hill, about a kilometre from the present location. The first monks came from the distant monastery of Waldsassen. They were led by their abbot, Reinhard von Frauenberg, who praised the magnificent view from the hilltop, but also noted the lack of water at the location. He believed that the pious founders had chosen an unfavourable spot. This, by the way, was the case with about a quarter of all Cistercian foundations. According to the Cistercian statutes, one should always select locations with abundant water sources down in the valleys. This was due to the principle of self-sufficiency. Water was essential to sustain that way of life.
Man brauchte dieses Wasser, eben sich selbst zu versorgen.
Als die Mönche damals ankamen, war das Gebiet.
When the monks arrived, about 90% of the area was covered by forests. It was a huge forest landscape. Here in the meadow region, alongside the Waldnau, there were primarily oak forests. Trees grew everywhere except in the wettest areas, which were swamps and bogs.
Kann man sagen, komplett bewaldet. Einzelne Rodungsinseln oder kleine Siedlungsbereiche.
Otherwise, you could say it was completely forested. There were some scattered clearings or small settlement areas from pre-monastic times. Those were established by Slavic or Frankish settlers. The monks intentionally sought to establish their new monastery in the vicinity of old trade routes. So I'd say that they didn't actually want to live isolated in the wilderness if you look at the wider context. They did want to have a connection to the outside world. While the Benedictines always built their monasteries on hills to assert their dominance, the Cistercians deliberately refused to do so, because they wanted to express their humility by always building their monasteries in valleys. So in terms of geographic location, valleys were also important as a symbol of humility.
Also geografisch gesehen, Täler waren wichtig, und einfach ihre Demut auszudrücken.
The oldest incarnation of Christian monk is the hermit. Hermits withdrew to the deserts of the Middle East from the 3rd century AD onwards to dedicate their lives to God and to live in strict devotion, far from civilization. For medieval Europeans, the forests and the marshlands were the wilderness, and it was here that the Cistercians made their home. It offered them the seclusion that was so important for an order based on contemplation. The location of a monastery had to satisfy these spiritual needs, but there were also very earthy and practical matters to consider.
We're on the so-called Schwarzer Berg, a monastery forest located in North Rhine-Westphalia, close to the Lower Saxony border. The wooded areas we see are part of the monastery's territory. Forestry operations have been going on for 850 years. Ever since the monastery's foundation in 1163, these woods have been owned and continuously managed by the monastery. Because wood has always been vitally important, in whatever form. First, it primarily served as a source of energy, and later also as a construction material. Whatever its usage, the forest has always played a vital role for the monastery. During its peak activity in the Middle Ages, around 1300, the entire forestry operation pretty much consisted of 100% deciduous wood, specifically oaks and beeches. However, after the 30 Years' War, the monastery had to redefine its concept of forestry. This actually heralds the beginnings of the concept of sustainability, which started in forestry and was shaped by forestry. First, the overexploitation following the 30 Years' War required a lot of reforestation efforts. And then the real transformation began only around 1700. At this time, more and more coniferous trees were introduced to meet the demands of industrialization, such as timber for construction, timber for mining, all of these things. And that's when the big shift to coniferous wood began. Today, the position of monastery forester is something very rare in Germany, as few monasteries still have forests and church foresters. I am actually the only one here in northern Germany. One of the forester's tasks is to ensure economic viability. We have to think about the bottom line, as those yields contribute to securing the monastery's continued existence. While agriculture is the primary source of income, the forestry sector also has to contribute its part.
Wir stehen hier ganz in der Nähe des Klosters.
We're standing here close to Brombach Abbey at a wolf pit. It's a medieval animal trap which is at least 500 years old, dating back to monastic times.
Der Wolf bedroht die
Wolves were not only a threat to the livelihood of farmers, who had very limited livestock in the Middle Ages, but they were also a worry to the sheep kept by the monks.
Schafsherden der Mönche.
This wolf pit, which looks similar to a well, is built from blocks of sandstone in a dry wall construction.
Trockenbauweise aufgemauert
Setting up such a wolf trap was a costly and laborious endeavor.
Falle zu errichten. Man sagte früher im Mittelalter,
According to a medieval saying, war years are wolf years. And this is quite apt, because during long wars, like the 30 Years' War, wolf populations positively exploded. The plague of wolves increasing as they fed on scattered animal carcasses and human corpses.
zu, weil überall Tierkadaver und auch Leichen herumlagen. Es ist davon auszugehen, dass
It can be assumed that this wolf pit was built by the monks and their lay brothers. It's quite likely that day and wage labourers also participated in such an elaborate construction. This also shows how crucial it was to eliminate this plague of wolves, because it was actually threatening the livelihood of the rural population.
auszuschalten, denn sie war tatsächlich für die meisten Leute im Mittelalter, für die Landbevölkerung existenzbedrohend.
Die Mönche, als sie hier nach Ebrach kamen,
When the monks came to Ibrach, they initially possessed very little land. Over the next 300 years, however, they acquired about 5,000 hectares of mostly forest, but also agricultural property, by employing strategic property policies.
wir stehen hier im Lichterwald,
We're in the Lichterwald forest at an old boundary marker between the monasteries of Ibrach and Münster-Schwarzach, whose properties met here. The border was originally marked with stones like this one. This is a replica, but a very faithful one. We can see Ibrach's coat of arms, the abbot's staff, and the letter E for Ibrach. These stones existed at the property boundaries of the old Cistercian forest, or any property of the Cistercians, really. What makes this one particularly interesting is that Münster-Schwarzach monastery had a small forest area here, and these stones show the coats of arms of both monasteries. There were hundreds of stones like this, and we have just found another one, which we will of course secure and preserve for future generations.
natürlich sichern und der Nachwelt erhalten.
We're in the forest of the Cistercian monastery of Rhein. Rhein Abbey owns 2,000 hectares of land, of which 1,900 hectares are forest and 100 hectares are agricultural land. We have been managing these forests since 1129. The primary species of tree that grow here are beech and spruce. The wood is used in the sawmill industry and in the paper industry, and some of it is also used for heating purposes as firewood.
Thermisch als Heizstoff, als Brennholz genutzt.
Ich gehe davon aus, dass die Mönche den Wald in erster Linie
I think that the monks primarily saw the forest in terms of economy. It was a vital source of income for them. At times, up to 50% of their total income came from forestry. They sold the highly valuable oaks to Holland and northern Germany for shipbuilding. They were quite shrewd businessmen.
Sie waren also sehr geschäftstüchtig. Es gab eben damals
Back then, there was a form of woodland use called middle forestry. The middle forest consisted of oaks, which were very valuable not only for their timber, but also for their fruit. That's why the rural population often grazed their pigs, sheep, cows and goats in these forests.
in die Wälder getrieben. Die Hinterlassenschaft der
The Cistercian heritage in these forests is evident in that they mostly consist of deciduous trees. The Cistercians did not convert the deciduous forest into a coniferous one, which turns out to have been quite prescient. Today, we know that coniferous forests are much less resilient to climate change compared to deciduous forests. Therefore, here in the Steigerwald, we benefit from the fact that the Cistercians did not convert these forests into coniferous ones.
Listen. The very first word of the rule of St. Benedict can be excellently answered in a place like this, a place of silence. Like no other order, the Cistercians understood how to connect faith and architecture. The layout of their monasteries followed a uniform pattern that was entirely subordinated to the requirements of spiritual life. Nothing was to distract from the essential. There were neither coloured windows nor pictures. Only repetitive geometric motifs encouraging the monks' concentration and meditation were permitted. The clarity and austerity of this radically reduced architecture and ascetic art of building still touches and impresses today.
Equally impressive are their libraries, rooms full of secrets and ancient knowledge.
Jak říká náš pan Převor, každý klášter musí mít knihovnu. Je to jako taková zbroj pro hrad, tak je, jako je zbroj pro hrad, tak je knihovna pro klášter. Knihy jsou nedílnou součástí života bratrů. Já zde pracuji jako restaurátorka knižní vazby. Vlastně starám se o stav těchto sálů, klimatických podmínek, ale i knih samotných. Takže když knihy jsou roztrhané nebo mají poškozené vazby, tak je opravuji. Je zajímavostí, že tady ta knihovna je vlastně v srdci kláštera, velice blízko, dalo by se říct, už klauzuře a je mi velkou ctí a mám tu čest tady pobývat vlastně nedaleko té klauzury, kdy se třeba setkávám s bratry, ale velice respektujeme svůj prostor a ta práce je možná dělat. Svoji práci mám ráda protože mám ráda historii, mám ráda staré věci. Knihy jsou pro mě opravdu zdrojem moudrosti, informací, prostě studnice, pokladnice, moudra. Ráda se jich dotýkám a přemýšlím nad příběhem, který každá kniha mohla mít, protože to nese mnoho informací.
Das ist das sogenannte Wolfgang-Missale. Das ist ein Messbuch.
This book is called the Wolfgang Missal and dates back to 1492-93. It's called the Wolfgang Missal because, according to a traditional narrative, Abbot Wolfgang inscribed it himself while kneeling down, no less. But there are doubts about this claim. The handwriting indicates that it was the work of a skilled scribe, and the beautiful paintings were most likely created by professional illuminators. It's a remarkable manuscript with numerous illuminations. Here we see a depiction of Rhein Abbey, actually the oldest known depiction of Rhein Abbey to date. It shows the church, the surrounding walls, and most notably, and of most interest to us, the farmsteads located in the upper part of the monastery. The farmsteads still exist today, and this representation from the late 15th century indicates that the abbey has always been not only a religious centre, but also an economic hub.
Die eben darauf hinweist, es ist ein religiöses Zentrum, aber es ist auch ein wirtschaftliches Zentrum.
The abbot no longer resides with the monks, but has his own chambers, which are actually quite grand during the Baroque period. The abbot is now almost inaccessible to the ordinary monks, and of course to the commoners as well. The abbot is a high lord. The Langheim abbots aspired to be even more than that, more than just the rulers of the monastery and the feudal lords of many tax-paying local peasants. While they didn't achieve this goal, they at least manifested it in their architectural structures. They constructed buildings fit for a prince, featuring 3 stories, exposed sandstone, and slate-covered roofs. You could say it was the pinnacle of opulence, a style to match that of Prince Bishop of Bamberg. The abbot's residence at Tambach could almost be considered a princely summer retreat, and it sent a message, written in architecture: we are in the same league, which had no basis in reality, however.
The Cistercians built a summer residence for themselves here to assert their entitlement and claim, we are more than just a normal monastery, and we are not beholden to the Archbishop and Bamberg, which of course had very opulent buildings itself. We are important too, and that is why we are building this. And in fact, the end result even went beyond the initial plans. It turned out to be even more lavish in the end. The first floor is 4.5 meters high, and the second is 6 meters high. That's showing quite the ambition. For a mere monastery, that's quite absurd.
Absurd.
A huge and complex structure like a monastery, which was also to function for an entire community, cannot be built spontaneously into the wilderness. It's not the abbot simply picking a spot and declaring, here I shall build my monastery. It had to be ensured with respect to legal as well as, of course, logistical matters, that the location was viable. Basically, it's like any other construction site. You need material, you need workers, of course you need building expertise, and before all that, you need a suitable location. You can't just build anything anywhere. These structures the monks are planning to build are enormous. They need a solid foundation that can support them. You need a local, easily accessible source for the stone. You need the roots to transport them. You need timber for building. And of course you need provisions for the many people doing the construction work. These are all vital requirements. As for the building materials, the monks used whatever was available in the region. In sandstone areas, they used sandstone. In granite areas, granite. So the region in which the monastery is established has an impact on both the materials and the construction techniques. Here we can see one of the key tasks during construction, which is creating a square beam from a round log. This surface is not planed, it's hewn using only an axe. And because you don't cut through the fibers like you do with a saw, but instead hew along the fibers, you get a very smooth surface that is also extremely weather resistant. This technique for making beams was used for many types of construction, including castles, townhouses, or monasteries. The construction experts actually came from within the monasteries themselves. There was no need to hire external craftsmen, as the monastic master builders also traveled between different monasteries. Of course, monastic building always served a greater purpose. The church, for example, was never only a church, but a symbol of faith, of God's greatness and beauty. The work also was a way for the monks to express themselves. When we take a closer look, we can see extreme differences between secular buildings and churches dating from the Middle Ages. Medieval churches are towering structures intended to praise God. The steeples rise high above the townhouses and the bells can be heard far and wide. All of this had symbolic power. It's also no coincidence that churches were the first buildings to have glass windows, something that secular buildings only had much later. The light shining through the stained glass naturally created a spiritual effect that elevated the entire church building. An ordinary person entering a church in medieval times, and we can no longer understand that today because we are completely overloaded with colors, flickering lights and such like. A medieval person who didn't have all that, coming from a modest mud dwelling into a church, was quite overwhelmed by the brightly colored windows, the vibrant play of light, the various shapes of the pillars. This experience immediately evoked a strong belief in God and a sense of seeing the kingdom of heaven on earth. Today, we can hardly grasp the immense effect that light, colors, and architectural forms had on people in the Middle Ages.
Was diese Bauformen für eine Wirkung auf den mittelalterlichen Menschen hatten.
The cultural and spiritual significance of these landscape elements endures to this day. A central example is Cisterciácké as a major place of pilgrimage. It served as the spiritual gateway to the Main Valley and still maintains its significance and radiant appeal as a place of pilgrimage. These are the kind of buildings created by the monastery, and their existence, their intricate forms, cannot be understood without considering the fact that they were once supported by a wealthy monastery.
Ein reiches Kloster.
Water is the source of all life, and the Cistercians knew this all too well. In accordance with their statutes, they built monasteries in valleys where streams and small rivers flowed. Here was the water they needed for themselves and their animals, for the kitchen and the infirmary, water to cleanse and to drive the mill wheels, and not least, water for the numerous fish ponds that provided nourishment in a calendar dominated by fasting. It's no coincidence that the device regulating the water level in fish ponds is still called a monk today. Sufficient water and the skillful regulation of it formed the basis of the monastic economy. The Cistercians were masters of hydraulic engineering, and traces of their art are still visible across Europe. Centuries later, the systems they set up to manage water are still in use today.
Wir stehen hier auf unserer Fischhofbrücke.
Here we are on our Fischhofbrücke, one of the most beautiful historical stone bridges still existing in Bavaria. It was built by Abbot Alexander Vogel. There's a nice story about it. For centuries there was a wooden bridge connecting the Fischhof, located on an island in the upper town pond, to the shore. But every few years the wild Waldnab River would tear it from its moorings. So good Alexander said, "I've had enough. I want a stone bridge." He called upon Philip Mottone, a great Baroque master builder from Waldsassen Monastery, to go to Regensburg and take a look at the city's bridge over the Danube. Mottone went there, looked at it, and is rumored to have said, "Alexander, my friend, we can do that too." Tirschenreuth has always benefited greatly from its ponds. While Waldsassen was the spiritual centre, Tirschenreuth was always the monastery's economic hub. We had close ties to Waldsassen, in matters of the church of course, but also in purely legal terms. It was similar to having a prince bishop who pulled all the strings and was in charge of everything. We were obliged to pay taxes and to provide services to Waldsassen, which means that we were very dependent on the monastery. Pond farming was vitally important, especially in the Middle Ages, and the monastery of Waldsassen also provided massive support for this enterprise by offering to create ponds for the bonded farmers. The monastery took the entire harvest, and for this the farmers were exempt from paying taxes. The clever abbots of Waldsassen knew the advantages of trade. The ponds we see here are several hundred years old. Most of the ponds in the district were privately owned, even during the monastery period. They were primarily built for the farmers, including my ancestors. Here in the district of Tirschenreuth, we have around 4,700 ponds covering an area of approximately 2,500 hectares. We cultivate about 50 hectares of it. That's about 60 ponds. The ponds have been an integral part of our farming operations for centuries, and the ponds in the district were the first to be created by the Ortenburg family over 1,000 years ago. Later, the Cistercian monks from the monastery continued and expanded these pond farming operations. In the Middle Ages, the focus was naturally on raising edible fish. To this day, carp continues to be the key player of carp pond farming because it works the soil, thereby ensuring the survival of the carp pond operation. However, today we also raise companion fish, including perch, pike, roach, rudd, and also whitefish, basically any fish that can be farmed in a carp pond.
Today the canal no longer serves any function. Only the Ebrach flows through it. It's still draining. Today the water level is low, so it's easy to walk across. After a rainfall, it's impossible to access. The Cistercians were masters of hydraulic engineering, and thanks to their work, we never experience flooding in the village centre, even after heavy rains. The church is also never flooded, no matter how hard it rains. And that's all thanks to the excellent work of the Cistercians, despite the fact that we're in the middle of swampland.
Along with efficient water management, farming has always been part of the daily work of monks and nuns. The Cistercian idea of the dignity of physical labour led to great economic success. Fields, orchards, vegetable gardens, beehives, fish ponds, breweries and vineyards surrounded the abbeys. It's thanks to the work of the Cistercians that we can enjoy many a delicacy today.
Ja, der Weinbau ist hier
Viticulture has likely been practiced here since monastic times, since the monks were at work here. This can be assumed because the monks also had their farmstead here, and the lay people who worked here certainly also cultivated vines. Of course, the monks also grew Pinot Noir, which was one of the most important grape varieties, especially during the time of the monks. In German, these grapes are called Burgunder grapes because they are believed to originate from the French region of Burgundy. While Pinot Noir grapes have always existed in Württemberg, they were mostly grown in smaller regions. Of course, our agricultural practices today are influenced by what the Cistercians did in the past. We have the Vondreb River nearby, and I believe the location was intentionally chosen due to its water supply. The farm used to be managed by working sisters from the Cistercian monastery. Of course, they also had quite a bit of manpower in the form of hired farmhands. They cultivated 160 hectares of land on the Mitterhof farmstead and engaged in animal husbandry, keeping the whole range of farm animals as was usual in the past. According to the Monuments Office, the farm was built between the 16th and 17th centuries and was operated by the sisters until 1967. In addition to farm animals and the ostrich farm, we also have a children's farm and a farm restaurant. The restaurant is open on Saturdays and Sundays, and on these days my work schedule revolves around it. On weekends, my focus shifts from farming to innkeeping and catering to our human visitors. We breed endangered species, and some of our guests come to me expressing concern about putting endangered animals on their plates and eating them. However, that is exactly what farm animal arcs actually do: promote conservation through responsible consumption. Their aim is to generate demand for these breeds, to convince farmers that it can be beneficial to reintroduce and preserve them.
My jsme sem přišli po sametové revoluci v roce 1990. Mniši jsou z různých krajů České republiky, z Polska taky je jeden, plus i z Německa. Ora et labora, modli se a pracuj, ten den vlastně je založen na 3 pilířích. První je to ora, modlitba, druhá je labora, práce, a třetí je lectio divina, duchovní četba. Mniši se především podělí na obnově kláštera, na práce na zahradě, v různých oborech, v truhlárně a tak dále. Zahradnictví, včelařství.
Tak máme zahrady v areálu kláštera, teď jsme teda na Převorské zahradě, pak máme soudní zahradu, kde je nová výsadba, a mimo areál kláštera máme ještě několik sadů, zvlášť na Budějovicku, kde taky je nová výsadba stromů, tam je to několik hektarů plochy vlastně sadů, takže větší část vlastně je mimo klášter, dalo by se říci. Provádíme vlastně jarní nebo zimní řez, předjarní řez stromů, jabloní. Většinou stromů máme tady jabloně, a co právě stříháme, a malou část vlastně těch zimních odrůd uskladníme na zimu, na jídlo přes zimu, ale většinu jablek vlastně smoštujeme, děláme z toho přírodní mošt, který nějak chemicky neupravujeme, a ten pak částečně pijeme a částečně, z větší části prodáváme turistům v klášterním obchodě. Když pracujeme na zahradě, tak nějakým způsobem spolupracujeme na tom božím díle stvoření, že vlastně dalo by se říct, pokračujeme v tom jeho díle stvoření tím, že vlastně, když on nám jaksi svěřil, a že máme z toho užitek, prostě ovoce a tak dále. Ale ta práce samozřejmě na zahradě pro mnichy je velmi důležitá, zvlášť pro mnichy, který se řídí tedy Benediktovou řeholí, protože hlavním tím heslem je to ora et labora, to znamená modli se a pracuj, takže ta práce má velmi důležité místo v mnišském životě, cisterciáků zvlášť.
Ke klášteru to nejsou jenom budovy, ale to jsou také především lesy a rybníky. A z výtěžku lesů i rybníků tento klášter znovu restaurujeme po stavební stránce, co komunisté zdevastovali.
Rhein Abbey is the oldest Cistercian monastery in the world. For almost 900 years, since 1126, the Cistercians have lived, worked, prayed and served the people here. What the Cistercians started 900 years ago continues to have an impact. You can see their influence in the landscape, in the pondscapes, in the vineyards they planted. The cultivation of this entire border area was the beginning, and we take pride in the fact that these traces can still be seen after 9 centuries, to this day.
Dass man das durch 9 Jahrhunderte sehen kann, auch heute noch.
Wir sind jetzt am Hochfeld.
We are now at the Hochfeld, which is the meadow orchard of Rhein Abbey. It covers an area of over 1.5 hectares. We cultivate a wide range of varieties, such as the Crown Prince we have right here, which is an excellent apple for eating. We grow these apples for our monastery shop, where we sell them. Then we have the Brunner variety and various heritage varieties like the Liederapfel. These need some time to mature. We use our all-purpose apples to make apple juice, which we also sell in the monastery shop. It gets better every year. People enjoy visiting the monastery shop for its unique range of products, and I think it's good for us to be able to market our own products. Both the local people and the visitors appreciate that as well. We mash our apples early, ferment them in barrels and then distill brandy, which we also offer in the monastery shop. We produce pear brandy, apple brandy and a fine cordial as well. This way, we make use of everything that grows in the orchard.
Dass alles von der Wiese verwertet ist.
We are here in Maulbronn, in our monastery vineyard. This vineyard was completely overgrown for many decades until we started to revive it in the 1990s. Since 1999, we've been cultivating vines here again. Here we are, right in between the Limburger and the Riesling. These are some of our Pinot Noir vines, and here we produce our monastery vineyard wines every year. What did the monks do with these good wines? Well, they enjoyed them, of course. According to the legend of the 11 fingers, there was a well inside the monastery where the monks were allowed to dip their fingers during Lent and then to lick them. It's said that one monk humorously remarked that it would be good to have 11 fingers to drink a little more. Personally, I assume that they drank from cups like everyone else and didn't need to lick their fingers.
The heyday of the monasteries is long gone. At first glance, not much remains of the Cistercian Empire. But if you take a closer look, you can see how the work of the monks shaped our world and how it still informs the everyday lives of the people who live here today. The White Order created thriving cultural landscapes. Its members ask questions that are still as relevant today as they were 900 years ago. How do we treat nature? What is the value of community? What do we work for? And how does that work shape us? Cistercian heritage connects people across the continent. Today, 17 monasteries from 5 countries together form a network. Cisterscapes, Cistercian landscapes connecting Europe. Cistercian landscapes offer an incredible variety of culinary specialities, natural spaces, and cultural treasures. Even today, these places invite us to immerse ourselves, to reflect, and to be active. Let's go on a journey to discover these landscapes with all our senses, Let's follow in the footsteps of the white monks.
Sterne